Marcus Whitfield never expected that checking his grain storage on a cold February morning would uncover a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew about loss, survival, and the power of human connection. What he found hiding in the shadows of his towering silo wasn't just a person seeking shelter. It was a revelation that would transform his understanding of what it truly means to live again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the pre-dawn darkness. At 4:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 years, Marcus Whitfield's calloused hand slammed down on the snooze button with practiced precision, his body moving through the motions of waking while his mind remained trapped in the fog of exhaustion that had become his constant companion. The farmhouse felt enormous around him, its silence echoing with memories that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Sarah's coffee mug still sat in the kitchen cabinet, exactly where she'd left it that Tuesday morning before heading to town. Her reading glasses remained folded on the knitstand, waiting for eyes that would never again scan the pages of her beloved mystery novels. Marcus pulled himself from bed, his joints protesting the movement with the sharp reminders of 48 years of hard labor. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet as he shuffled toward the kitchen, each creak a familiar note in the symphony of solitude that had replaced the warm chaos of family life. Outside, the Nebraska winter stretched endlessly across his 800-acre property, the landscape painted in shades of gray and brown that matched his mood. Snow had fallen during the night, not enough to create beauty, just sufficient to make everything look stark and unforgiving. The thermometer outside the kitchen window read 12 degrees below zero. He'd inherited this land from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Whitfields had worked this soil, raised families here, built something lasting. Now Marcus wondered if he'd be the last, if all those years of backbreaking work would die with him in this house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma that used to signal the beginning of conversations about the day ahead. Plans for dinner, discussions about their daughter Emma's college applications. Now it simply marked another day to be endured rather than lived. Marcus had tried to maintain the routines that once gave structure to their shared life. Check the equipment, inspect the storage facilities, review the grain prices, plan for the next planting season. But each task felt hollow, performed more from muscle memory than purpose. The phone rang twice while he dressed in his heavy work clothes. He didn't answer. It was probably Bill Henderson from the neighboring farm, calling to check on him the way neighbors did when they worried you might not make it through another day. Marcus appreciated the concern, but he wasn't ready for conversations about moving on or finding purpose again. He stepped outside into air so cold it burned his lungs, the snow crunching beneath his boots as he made his way toward the cluster of buildings that housed the heart of his operation. The grain silos rose like sentinels against the gray sky, their metal surfaces gleaming with frost. These silos represented everything he'd worked for: the ability to store his harvest properly, to sell when prices were favorable rather than being forced to dump grain at harvest time like smaller operations. He'd spent years saving for them, years more paying them off. Sarah had been so proud when they finally made the last payment. The largest silo, the one farthest from the house, had been giving him trouble lately. The moisture control system had been acting up, and with the extreme temperature fluctuations, he worried about condensation damage to the grain stored inside. Insurance would cover some losses, but not the kind of financial hit that could force him to sell the land his grandfather had fought to keep during the Depression. As he approached the silo, something felt different. The snow around the base wasn't uniformly distributed like it should have been after last night's storm. There were disturbances in the white blanket, subtle signs that someone or something had been here recently. Marcus paused, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he examined the area more carefully. Footprints, small ones, barely visible, in the snow, leading from the tree line toward the silo's base. His first thought was teenagers from town, maybe looking for a place to drink or cause mischief. It wouldn't be the first time, but as he followed the trail, something about the prints nagged at him. They weren't the careless stomps of kids out for trouble. These were careful, deliberate steps, the kind made by someone trying not to be noticed. The access ladder to the silo's maintenance platform was slightly askew, not hanging in its usual position against the curved wall. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone had definitely been here, and recently. He climbed the ladder slowly, his work gloves gripping the cold metal rungs. At the top, the maintenance hatch that should have been sealed tight was slightly ajar. His heart began to pound as possibilities raced through his mind. Vandalism was one thing, but if someone had contaminated his grain supply, he could lose everything. Marcus pulled the heavy hatch open fully and peered into the silo's interior. The grain level was lower than it should have been, but that wasn't what made him freeze in place. There, nestled in a small hollow carved into the wheat, was a makeshift shelter constructed from old tarps and what looked like stolen blankets from his own barn. "Hello," his voice echoed strangely in the metal chamber. "I know someone's in here." The silence stretched for several heartbeats before he heard it, a soft rustling, like someone shifting position while trying to remain hidden. Marcus's mind raced. He should call the sheriff, report the trespassing. But something held him back, perhaps the memory of his own desperation in recent months, the way grief had made him understand what it felt like to have nowhere safe to turn. "I'm not going to hurt you," he called down. "But I need to know who's in my grain silo." Another pause, longer this time, followed by the sound of someone moving carefully through the grain. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the chamber, and Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a young woman, maybe 25 or 30, with long dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen a proper washing in weeks. Her clothes were layered and mismatched, clearly chosen for warmth rather than appearance. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They held the same hollow exhaustion he saw in his own mirror every morning. "Please don't call the police," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "I'll leave right now. I just needed somewhere warm to sleep." Marcus stared down at her, processing the impossibility of the situation. A woman had been living in his grain silo, surviving somehow in temperatures that could kill, and he'd had no idea. Part of him felt violated, angry that someone had invaded his property without permission. But a larger part recognized something in her desperate posture that resonated with his own sense of being lost. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She hesitated, clearly debating whether honesty or fabrication would serve her better. 2 weeks, she finally admitted. Maybe a little longer. "I tried to be careful, not to take too much." 2 weeks. Marcus thought about all the times he'd checked this silo during that period, how close he'd come to discovering her without realizing it. She must have heard him coming, hidden deeper in the grain each time he'd performed his routine inspections. "What's your name?" Another pause. Lily Chen." "Where are you from, Lily?" "Originally, California. But I've been traveling for a while now." Marcus studied her face, noting the sharp angles that suggested she hadn't been eating regularly. The way she held herself with the careful alertness of someone accustomed to danger. Whatever had brought her to his grain silo in the middle of a Nebraska winter, it wasn't a casual decision. "You must be freezing," he said. Lily wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that seemed more protective than warming. "I've managed. Your silo holds heat better than you might think, especially buried in the grain." The practical part of Marcus's mind cataloged the problems this created. Contamination concerns, liability issues, the simple fact that a person couldn't survive indefinitely in these conditions. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant since Sarah's death, stirred with something he hadn't felt in months. The need to help someone else. "You can't stay here," he said, but his tone wasn't harsh. "It's not safe, and the grain could shift. You could suffocate." Lily nodded, her shoulders sagging with defeat. "I know. I was going to leave anyway. The weather's supposed to break tomorrow. Where will you go?" She shrugged, a gesture that said everything about how few options she had. "South, I guess. Somewhere warmer." Marcus found himself speaking before he'd consciously made the decision. "Come down from there. We need to talk." Fear flashed across Lily's features. "I told you. I'll leave right now." "You don't need to. I'm not calling anyone," Marcus interrupted. "But if we're going to have a conversation, we're not doing it with you up there and me down here. There's a ladder at the back corner." He watched as she gathered her few possessions into a worn backpack, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd had to pack quickly many times before. When she emerged from the silo's base access hatch, Marcus got his first clear look at her. In daylight, she was younger than he'd initially thought, probably closer to 25, with delicate features that contrasted sharply with the hardness in her eyes. Her clothes were clean but worn thin, layered in a way that spoke of experience. With cold and hunger. Most striking were her hands. They were soft, uncalloused. The hands of someone who hadn't spent their life doing manual labor. "You're not from around here," Marcus observed. "No," Lily agreed, shouldering her pack and looking toward the road as if calculating how quickly she could disappear. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And you're not a drifter." This time she looked at him directly, wariness replacing the fear in her expression. "What makes you say that?" Marcus gestured toward her hands, her posture, the way she spoke. "You carry yourself like someone who's educated, who's used to better circumstances. Whatever brought you here, it wasn't a lifestyle choice." Lily's jaw tightened. "Does it matter? I'll be gone in an hour, and you can forget this ever happened." "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe you can tell me why someone who clearly doesn't belong. Sleeping in grain silos is doing exactly that in the middle of winter." The two of them stood in the snow between the silo and the farmhouse, the morning sun beginning to burn through the overcast sky. Marcus realized this was the longest conversation he'd had with another person since Sarah's funeral. There was something about Lily's presence, her obvious desperation mixed with dignity, that pierced through the fog of isolation he'd been living in. "I don't owe you my story," Lily said, but without hostility. "No, you don't," Marcus agreed. "But I'm offering you breakfast and a warm place to sit while you figure out your next move. That's got to be better than walking to town in this weather." Lily studied his face, clearly trying to determine whether this was kindness or a trap. Marcus understood her caution. A woman traveling alone had reasons to be suspicious of offers from strange men. "Just breakfast," she said finally. "Then I'll go." Marcus nodded and started walking toward the house, not looking back to see if she followed. He heard her footsteps in the snow behind him after a moment's hesitation. The kitchen felt different, with another person in it, less like a shrine to memory and more like a functional space. Marcus busied himself with preparing food while Lily stood near the door, clearly ready to bolt if necessary. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Table. Coffee? Please." As the bacon sizzled in the pan and eggs cracked into the skillet, Marcus found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. She sat very still, her hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug, but her eyes constantly moved, cataloging exits and potential threats. Everything about her posture screamed that she was accustomed to danger. "How did you know the grain wouldn't hurt you?" Marcus asked as he cooked. "I didn't, at first," Lily admitted. "But I researched it on my phone before the battery died. Wheat is pretty safe as long as you don't go too deep and create air pockets." "You have a phone?" "Had. It's dead now, and I don't have a charger." Marcus served the food, noting how Lily's Eyes widened slightly when she saw the full plate. She ate carefully, trying not to appear desperate, but he could tell it had been a while since she'd had a proper meal. "This is very kind of you," she said between bites. "My wife would have insisted." Marcus replied, then felt the familiar stab of grief that came with mentioning Sarah. She never could stand the thought of anyone going hungry. Lily paused in her eating. "Would you have?" "She died 3 years ago. Car accident. I'm sorry." Marcus nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to mention Sarah to this stranger. Usually, any reference to his wife brought conversations to an awkward halt as people struggled with appropriate responses to grief. "What about you?" he asked. "Family wondering where you are." Lily's expression hardened. "No family. That's part of the problem." They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes before Marcus spoke again. "You said you researched grain storage on your phone. That suggests you had access to the internet recently. Library in the last town. They let you use computers. For an hour if you have an ID. But you're traveling without a car. Buses mostly, sometimes hitchhiking when I have to." Marcus set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Lily, I've lived on this land for 48 years. I know the difference between someone passing through and someone running from something. Which are you?" The question hung in the air between them. Lily finished her eggs before answering, and Marcus could see her weighing how much truth to reveal. "Both," she said finally. "I'm passing through because I'm running from something. Something or someone. Someone." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Dangerous someone?" Lily's laugh held no humor. "You could say that." The weight of her words settled over the kitchen like a shadow. Marcus realized he was standing at a crossroads he hadn't anticipated when he'd climbed that silo ladder an hour ago. He could thank Lily for her honesty, wish her well, and watch her walk away into a winter that could easily kill her. Or he could ask the question that was forming in his mind, the one that would change both their lives forever. How dangerous? He asked. Lily met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd found her, he saw not just fear and exhaustion, but a flicker of hope that she was trying desperately to suppress. "Dangerous enough that I haven't used my real name in 8 months, she said quietly. "Dangerous enough that I can't go home, can't contact anyone I used to know, can't stay in one place long enough to build any kind of life." Marcus absorbed this information, his mind working through implications. "What did you do?" "I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. And now the people who did it want to make sure I never talk about it." The simple statement carried the weight of a life completely derailed, of safety and normalcy torn away in an instant. Marcus thought about his own losses, how grief had made him feel like a stranger in his own life. But grief, devastating as it was fundamentally different from active persecution. "How long can you keep running?" he asked. "I don't know." Lily admitted. "I had some money saved, but it's almost gone. Winter makes everything harder. I thought I could make it to somewhere warmer, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. She was at the end of her resources, physically and financially. The grain silo had been a desperate gamble, and she'd known it. "The people looking for you," Marcus said carefully. "Would they think to look for you here, on a farm in Nebraska?" Lily shook her head. "I don't think they even know I left California. I've been very careful about not leaving digital traces." Marcus stood and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the vast expanse of his property. The isolation that had felt like a prison for the past 3 years suddenly seemed like something else entirely, a refuge dot when he turned back to Lily. She was watching him with the careful attention of someone whose survival depended on reading people accurately. "I have a proposition for you," Marcus said. Lily's hands tightened around her coffee mug, her knuckles white against the ceramic. "What kind of proposition?" Marcus returned to his seat, his weathered face serious. "This farm is 800 acres of the most isolated land in 3 counties. My nearest neighbor is 4 miles away, and he minds his own business. The main road is 2 miles from the house, and I get maybe 1 visitor a month. You're offering me a place to hide. I'm offering you a job." Lily blinked, clearly not expecting this turn. A job? Marcus leaned forward, his voice gaining strength as the idea took shape in his mind. "I've been trying to run this place alone for 3 years, and I'm failing. The bookkeeping is a disaster. The equipment maintenance logs are months behind. And I can barely keep up with the basic operations. Sarah used to handle the administrative side. I don't know anything about farming." "But you're educated. You mentioned research. You speak well. You think before you act. I don't need another pair of hands for physical labor. I need someone who can organize information, manage records, maybe help me figure out why my profit margins have been shrinking every year." Lily studied his face, searching for deception or ulterior motives. "Why would you help someone you don't know? Someone who might be dangerous to have around?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. 3 years ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. Sarah and I had plans. We were going to travel after I retired. Maybe downsize to a smaller place, spend time with the grandchildren we hoped Emma would give us someday. Then one phone call changed everything. He stood and walked to a framed photograph on the kitchen counter, picking it up gently. The image showed a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, her arm around Marcus's shoulders as they stood in front of a barn raising. Sarah was driving back from her book club meeting in town. It was raining, and she hit a patch of standing water on Highway 34. The car hydroplaned into a tree. Marcus set the photo down carefully. "She died instantly," they said. "Didn't suffer." Lily's expression softened. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." It was. But you know what made it worse? The isolation afterward. Friends and neighbors rallied around for the first few weeks, bringing casseroles and offering to help with chores. Then life moved on for everyone else, but I was still here, alone with memories and a farm too big for one person. Marcus returned to his seat, meeting Lily's eyes directly. "I know what it's like to feel like the world has become hostile, like you don't have anywhere safe to turn. Maybe our situations are different, but the loneliness is the same. You could hire anyone to help with bookkeeping. Put an ad online, find someone local. Could I? A stranger shows up to work on an isolated farm with a widower who hasn't been the most social person lately. People would talk, and in a small community like this, talk spreads fast. But if someone was already here, already part of the situation..." Marcus shrugged. "Besides, most qualified people don't want to live in the middle of nowhere." Lily absorbed this, her analytical mind clearly working through possibilities and risks. What exactly would this job involve? Organizing financial records, updating equipment maintenance schedules, researching market trends for crop sales, maybe helping me understand some of the new digital systems everyone expects farmers to use now. Basically, everything that requires sitting at a computer or dealing with paperwork. And in exchange, room and board, a small salary, and a place where no one will ask questions about your past. Marcus paused, then added, "At least until you figure out what comes next." The offer hung between them like a bridge neither was certain was strong enough to cross. Lily stood and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the vast expanse of snow-covered fields. "The people I'm running from," she said without turning around, "they're not the kind who give up easily. If they ever traced me here, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who helped me. What exactly did you witness?" Lily was silent for so long that Marcus began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was a financial analyst for a tech company in San Francisco. Meridian Systems. They developed software for healthcare management. I was good at my job, really good. I could spot irregularities in data that other people missed. She turned back toward Marcus, her face pale but determined. 6 months before I ran, I was working late on a quarterly report when I noticed some discrepancies in our client billing records. Small amounts at first, but spread across hundreds of accounts. When I dug deeper, I realized someone was skimming money from insurance reimbursements. How much money? Over 18 months? Nearly $40 million. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. That's serious fraud. It gets worse. When I tried to trace the source of the discrepancies, I discovered the theft wasn't random. Someone was specifically targeting accounts for elderly patients and people with chronic illnesses, the most vulnerable clients who were least likely to catch billing errors. Lily began pacing the kitchen, her movements sharp with remembered anger. I thought I was being careful, conducting my investigation quietly. But I must have triggered some kind of alert in their system, because 3 days later, my supervisor called me in for a meeting. To discuss what you'd found? To fire me. They claimed my position was being eliminated due to budget cuts, but they offered me a severance package that was 3 times what I should have received. When I asked why, my supervisor, a man I'd worked with for 2 years, looked me straight in the eye and said it was because they valued my discretion. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. They knew you'd discovered the fraud. They knew, and they were paying me to keep quiet about it. When I refused the severance and said I was going to report what I'd found, everything changed. The next morning, I woke up to 2 men in suits standing in my apartment. They broke in? They had keys. Later, I realized they must have gotten them from my building's management company, probably claimed to be federal agents or something similar. They were very polite, very professional. They explained that I had misunderstood some complex financial transactions, that my accusations could damage innocent people's reputations and careers. Lily sat back down at the table, her hands shaking slightly as she continued. They offered me a new severance package, $500,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and forget what I thought I'd seen. When I said no, they showed me photographs. What kind of photographs? Pictures of me leaving my apartment, getting coffee, meeting friends for dinner. Pictures taken over several weeks without my knowledge. They explained that someone with my skills could easily have an accident, a fall downstairs, a gas leak, a car malfunction. Very sad, very believable accidents. Marcus felt anger building in his chest. They threatened to kill you. They never used those words. They were too professional for direct threats. But the message was clear. Take the money and disappear. Quietly or disappear permanently. What did you do? I told them I needed time to think about it. They said I had 48 hours to decide. Lily laughed bitterly. I spent that night researching everything I could about the people involved. My supervisor, the company executives, the shell companies being used to hide the stolen money. By morning, I had enough evidence to prove the fraud and identify most of the people involved. Did you go to the police? I tried. I went to the FBI field office in San Francisco with everything I'd compiled. The agent who met with me was very interested, very professional. He said they would investigate thoroughly and that I might need to testify eventually, but in the meantime, I should be careful and avoid contact with anyone from Meridian Systems. Lily's expression grew bitter. 2 hours after I left the FBI office, I got a phone call from my supervisor. He thanked me for my visit to the federal building and suggested I reconsider their offer. That's when I knew someone inside law enforcement was feeding them information. Marcus felt his world shifting as he processed the implications of her story. This wasn't a simple case of witnessing a crime. Lily had stumbled into something with tentacles, reaching into multiple institutions. So you ran. I emptied my bank account, packed 1 bag, and drove to the airport. I bought a ticket to Denver with cash, then immediately bought another ticket to Phoenix. I've been moving ever since, never staying anywhere longer than a few weeks, always paying cash, never using my real name. How did you end up in Nebraska? Random choice mostly. I was in Colorado and heard about seasonal work at processing plants in the Midwest. I thought I could disappear into migrant worker communities, earn some money, figure out my next move. But the work was harder than I expected, and when it ended, I didn't have enough savings to get somewhere warmer. Marcus stood and refilled their coffee cups, his mind working through everything Lily had told him. The story explained her educated speech patterns, her soft hands, her obvious discomfort with manual labor. It also explained the fear in her eyes and her reluctance to trust anyone. "The people looking for you," he said. "Do they know what you copied from the company files? They have to assume I have everything. I was thorough in my research, and I had access to financial records going back 3 years. If that information ever became public, it wouldn't just expose the fraud. It would implicate dozens of people in what amounts to organized theft from healthcare systems, including people in law enforcement. At least one FBI agent, possibly more. And probably people in other agencies. You don't steal $40 million without having connections in multiple places." Marcus returned to his seat, studying Lily's face. "Why trust me with this information? For all you know, I could be connected to them somehow." Lily smiled for the first time since he'd found her, though it didn't reach her eyes. A struggling farmer in rural Nebraska? If you're part of a sophisticated financial fraud conspiracy, they're really expanding their recruitment territory. Fair point. Marcus found himself almost smiling in return. "But seriously, why tell me?" "Because you offered me something I haven't had in 8 months. A chance to stop running, at least temporarily, and because ... She hesitated, then continued. "Because you understand what it's like to have your life completely changed by circumstances beyond your control." They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of what had been shared. Marcus realized that his casual offer of employment had become something much more significant. A decision that could put him at risk but might also save someone's life. "If you stayed here," he said finally, "how would we explain your presence to anyone who asked?" "We probably wouldn't have to explain much. Like you said, you don't get many visitors, and I'd be working inside most of the time. If anyone did ask, you could say I'm a distant relative helping out while I get back on my feet after a divorce or something. That could work. What about identification? Driver's license, social security card?" Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn wallet. From it, she extracted a driver's license and social security card. "Rebecca Martinez from Phoenix, Arizona. I bought the identity from someone in Denver for $2,000. It's good enough to pass a casual inspection, but I wouldn't want to try applying for any government benefits with it." Marcus examined the documents. The photo was clearly Lily, but with different hair and makeup. The address listed was for an apartment complex that probably had high tenant turnover. "Rebecca Martinez," he said, handing the documents back. "I suppose I should get used to calling you that. You'd really do this? Let a stranger with a fake identity work on your farm, knowing that dangerous people might come looking for her?" Marcus looked around his kitchen, taking in the silence that had become his constant companion. The empty spaces where Sarah's presence used to fill every corner. "Rebecca, this farm has been dying slowly for 3 years, just like I have. Maybe we can help each other survive." "It won't be forever, Lily," Rebecca said quietly. "Eventually, I'll have to move on. These people won't stop looking, and I can't hide indefinitely. Maybe not. But maybe in the time you're here, we can both figure out what comes next." Rebecca stood and extended her hand to Marcus. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Whitfield. When do I start?" Marcus shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip and the determination in her eyes. "How about right now? I'll show you to the guest room, and then we can take a look at the office. You're going to be amazed at how disorganized my record keeping has become." As they walked through the farmhouse, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for tomorrow. The house felt different with another person in it. Less like a museum of memories and more like a place where life might actually happen again. But as Rebecca followed him upstairs, both of them were thinking about the same unspoken question. How long could this arrangement last before the past caught up with them? In the guest room that had once been prepared for visits from Emma that never happened, Rebecca set down her worn backpack and looked around at clean sheets and warm walls. For the first time in 8 months, she had a place to sleep where she didn't have to worry about freezing or being discovered by strangers. Marcus left her to settle in and walked back to his kitchen, where the breakfast dishes still sat on the table. As he washed them, he found himself wondering what Sarah would think of this decision. She'd always been the one to bring home stray cats and injured birds, the one who insisted they hire high school kids who needed work even when they couldn't really afford extra help. He thought she might approve. Or at least, he hoped she would understand that sometimes helping someone else was the only way to help yourself. Outside, the Nebraska winter continued its relentless grip on the land, but inside the farmhouse, 2 people who had lost everything were preparing to build something new from the pieces of their shattered lives. Neither of them could predict what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in months, neither of them was facing those challenges alone. The transformation began immediately. Within hours of Rebecca settling into the guest room, Marcus found himself experiencing something he'd forgotten existed: productivity, driven by purpose rather than mere routine. The farm office, located in what had once been Sarah's craft room, was a disaster that embarrassed Marcus to show another person. 3 years of haphazard record-keeping had created towers of invoices, scattered receipts, and filing cabinets stuffed with documents in no discernible order. The computer, a desktop model Sarah had insisted they buy in 2019, was covered in dust and surrounded by notebooks filled with Marcus's illegible handwriting. "This is where you've been managing an 800-acre operation?" Rebecca asked, standing in the doorway with undisguised amazement. "I've been surviving, not managing," Marcus admitted. Sarah used to handle all this. She had systems, spreadsheets, filing methods that actually made sense. After she died, I just kept throwing papers at the problem and hoping it would work itself out. Rebecca moved into the room with the careful assessment of someone trained to find patterns in chaos. She picked up a handful of receipts from the desk, examining dates and amounts with practiced efficiency. "When was the last time you reconciled your accounts?" "Define reconcile." "Balanced your checkbook." "Compare your bank statements to your expense records." "Made sure the money going out matched what you think you spent." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I haven't bounced any checks." "That's not the same thing." Rebecca sat down at the computer and pressed the power button. "Do you have accounting software?" "Sarah had something called QuickBooks, but I haven't touched it since she died. I wasn't sure I remembered her password." The computer wheezed to life, its fan making concerning noises. Rebecca navigated to the QuickBooks icon and clicked it open. A password prompt appeared on the screen. Any guesses what she might have used? Marcus thought for a moment. "Try Emma 1995. That's our daughter's name and birth year." Rebecca typed the password, and the program opened to reveal the last entries Sarah had made in February 2022. The records were meticulous through that date, every expense categorized, every income source documented, detailed notes about equipment, purchases and maintenance schedules. Then everything stopped. She was incredibly organized, Rebecca said, scrolling through months of precise entries. "Look at this." She tracked seasonal patterns, noted which suppliers gave better prices, even recorded weather data that affected crop yields. Marcus leaned over her shoulder to look at the screen, and for a moment, Sarah's presence felt almost tangible. Her systematic approach to managing their finances, her careful attention to details he'd always found tedious, her ability to see patterns and plan for the future. I tried to keep up with it at first, he said. But I didn't understand her system, and everything felt overwhelming. It was easier to just pay bills when they came in and deposit checks when I sold grain. Easier maybe, but not sustainable. Rebecca pulled up the farm's profit and loss statements for the past 3 years. The trend was unmistakable, declining profits despite relatively stable grain prices. You're hemorrhaging money, Marcus. Small amounts in dozens of different categories, but it adds up. Marcus studied the numbers, feeling a familiar weight of failure settle over him. I know the farm isn't as profitable as it used to be. I assumed. It was because of market conditions, changes in the industry. Some of it probably is, but look at this. Rebecca pointed to a line item labeled equipment maintenance. In 2021, Sarah budgeted $15,000 for routine maintenance and repairs. In 2024, you spent $31,000. Either your equipment is falling apart, or you're not getting competitive prices on parts and labor. Probably both. Rebecca opened another file showing supplier contracts and vendor relationships. She negotiated annual contracts with parts suppliers, scheduled maintenance during off-season months when technicians charged lower rates, even bulk-ordered commonly needed items. You've been paying retail prices for everything and calling for emergency repairs instead of preventive maintenance. The evidence of his mismanagement was overwhelming, but instead of feeling defensive, Marcus found himself grateful for Rebecca's analytical approach. She presented the problems without judgment, focusing on solutions rather than blame. How much trouble am I in? He asked. Rebecca spent the next hour pulling together financial data, creating spreadsheets that organized 3 years of chaotic record-keeping into comprehensible categories. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with professional competence, turning the dusty computer into a tool that actually provided useful information. The good news is that you're not bankrupt, she said finally. The land alone is worth more than your debts, and you have equity built up over decades. The bad news is that you're operating at a loss, and it's getting worse each year. How much? Worse? At current trends, you'll be forced to sell within 5 years. Maybe sooner if you have a bad harvest or major equipment failure. Marcus sank into a chair, the weight of potential failure pressing down on him. My grandfather held on to this land during the Depression. My father built it up from 200 acres to 800. I'm going to be the one who loses it all. Not if we can help. Rebecca's voice was firm. This is fixable, Marcus. You have good land, solid equipment, and decades of experience. You just need better management systems. I told you I was a financial analyst. This is exactly the kind of problem I use to solve for companies. Identifying inefficiencies, streamlining operations, maximizing profit margins. The scale is different, but the principles are the same. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt a spark of hope about the farm's future. What would you need to do? First, I need to understand your complete financial picture. Income sources, expense categories, seasonal patterns, vendor relationships. Then I can identify where you're losing money and develop strategies to reduce costs and increase profits. Rebecca turned back to the computer, her enthusiasm for the project evident in her posture and tone. I also want to research current market trends for grain sales. Look into government programs that might provide financial assistance or tax benefits, and evaluate whether you're maximizing revenue from your land usage. This could take weeks, probably months to do it properly. But I have time, and honestly, it feels good to use my skills for something constructive again. They worked together for the rest of the day, with Rebecca organizing documents while Marcus provided context about farming operations and local business relationships. As afternoon faded into evening, the office began to resemble a functional workspace rather than a storage area for financial chaos. I should start dinner, Marcus said as shadows lengthened outside the windows. I can cook, Rebecca offered. I'm not an expert, but I can manage basic meals. You don't have to, Marcus. I'm not a guest here. If this arrangement is going to work, I need to contribute more than just bookkeeping. Besides, cooking for 2 people is easier than cooking for 1. They moved to the kitchen together, and Marcus found himself experiencing another forgotten pleasure: shared domestic activities. Rebecca examined the contents of his refrigerator and pantry with the same analytical approach she'd applied to his financial records. When was the last time you ate fresh vegetables? She asked, holding up a bag of frozen peas. I eat vegetables. Corn counts as a vegetable. Corn is a grain. And frozen doesn't count as fresh. Rebecca began pulling ingredients from the pantry. Tomorrow, we're going to town for groceries. Real groceries, not just frozen dinners and canned soup. As Rebecca prepared what she called real food, chicken baked with herbs, rice that didn't come from a box, vegetables that required actual preparation, Marcus realized how much his daily routine had deteriorated since Sarah's death. He'd been surviving rather than living, maintaining existence rather than embracing life. Tell me about your daughter, Rebecca said, as they waited for the food to finish cooking. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her recent photos. Emma. She's 29, lives in Chicago, works as a marketing manager for a consulting firm. She's been trying to get me to visit, but I keep finding excuses. She's beautiful. She looks like your wife. She has Sarah's eyes and her stubborn streak. After the accident, Emma wanted me to sell the farm and move to Chicago. She couldn't. Understand why I'd want to stay in a place with so many memories. Why did you want to stay? Marcus considered the question while setting the table with actual plates instead of eating straight from the containers. At first, I thought it was because this is where I felt closest to Sarah, but after 3 years of isolation, I think I was just afraid of starting over somewhere else. This farm is all I know. And now? Now I'm wondering if Emma was right. Maybe I should have sold it when she first suggested it. Rebecca turned from the stove to look at him directly. Is that what you want to do? Sell the farm? I don't know what I want anymore. 3 years ago, I had a clear vision of my future. Now I'm just trying to make it through each day. That's not a long-term strategy. No, it's not. Marcus felt the truth of that statement settle into his bones. But I don't know how to want things again. How to plan for a future that doesn't include the person I expected to share it with. Rebecca served the food, and they sat down to the vol. First real meal Marcus had eaten in his own kitchen since before Sarah's death. The simple act of sharing food prepared with care felt revolutionary after years of functional eating. After I started running, Rebecca said, cutting her chicken into precise pieces, I thought a lot about the difference between surviving and living. For months, I was focused entirely on not getting caught, not getting killed. But somewhere in Colorado, I realized that even if I managed to stay alive, I wasn't really living anymore. What changed? I started thinking about what I wanted my life to look like if I ever got out of this situation. Not just what I wanted to avoid, but what I wanted to build. Rebecca paused, fork halfway to her mouth. I realized I missed having work that mattered, using my skills to solve real problems, being part of something larger than just my own survival. Is that why you accepted my offer? Partly, but also because I saw something in you that I recognized. Someone who'd forgotten how to want things, but was still capable of caring about something other than himself. Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment. What do you mean? You found a stranger living in your grain silo, and your first instinct wasn't to call the police or demand I leave immediately. You were curious about my story, concerned about my welfare. Even in the middle of your own grief and isolation, you were still capable of compassion. They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes before Marcus spoke again. What happened? To the evidence you gathered about the fraud? Rebecca's expression grew guarded. I still have copies. Hidden, but accessible if I ever need them. Have you thought about what you might do with that information? Every day. But right now, it would be suicide. The people involved have too much power, too many connections. I need to find a way to expose them without destroying myself in the process. What would that look like? Rebecca set down her fork and looked out the kitchen window toward the darkening fields. I'm not sure yet. Maybe finding a journalist who specializes in investigative reporting, someone with the resources to verify the information independently. Or maybe working with a different law enforcement agency, one that doesn't have connections to the people involved. That sounds dangerous. Everything about my situation is dangerous. But I can't spend the rest of my life running from the shadows. Eventually, I need to find a way to fight back. Marcus studied her profile as she gazed out the window, noting the determination in her jawline and the way her hands clenched slightly when she talked about fighting back. This was someone who'd been knocked down but not defeated. Someone who understood the difference between tactical retreat and permanent surrender. How can I help? He asked. Rebecca turned to look at him with surprise. Marcus, you're already helping more than you know. You've given me a safe place to think, to plan, to remember who I am beyond just someone running from danger. That's not enough. It's everything. Do you understand what it means to feel secure enough to sleep through the night? To wake up in the same place I went to sleep? To have work that engages my mind instead of just trying to disappear into manual labor? Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand that his offer of employment had provided something more valuable than just shelter. It had given Rebecca a chance to reclaim her identity and skills. Besides, she continued, helping you save. This farm is important work. This land has been in your family for generations. It represents stability, continuity, the kind of legacy that matters. I want to be part of preserving that. After dinner, they returned to the office to continue organizing documents. Working by lamplight, surrounded by papers and the quiet hum of the computer, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the satisfaction of productive collaboration. I found something interesting, Rebecca said, holding up a folder. Sarah was researching sustainable farming practices and government conservation programs. Look at this. She showed him correspondence with the Department of Agriculture about programs that provided financial incentives for farmers who implemented environmentally friendly practices. Sarah had been in the middle of applying for several grants when the accident happened. She never mentioned this to me, Marcus said, reading through the documents. She probably wanted to surprise you. These programs could provide significant additional income, tens of thousands of dollars per year if you qualify. Marcus felt a familiar stab of loss, but it was mixed with something else. Gratitude for Sarah's foresight and planning, even in areas he'd never known she was exploring. Can we still apply for these programs? Some of them, yes. The application deadlines have passed for this year, but we can prepare applications for next year's funding cycles. And there are other programs she wasn't aware of, new initiatives, that have been launched since 2022. As the evening wore on, Marcus began to see his farm through Rebecca's analytical perspective. Instead of a failing operation dragging him toward financial ruin, it became a complex system with multiple opportunities for improvement and optimization. You know, he said as they finally prepared to close the office for the night, I haven't felt this hopeful about the farm in years. Good, Rebecca replied, saving their work on the computer. Because tomorrow we will start implementing changes. And Marcus? Yes? Thank you for giving me a chance to remember what it feels like to build something instead of just running from it. As they turned off the lights and headed upstairs, both of them felt the cautious stirring of something that had been dormant for too long. The belief that tomorrow might be better than today. Outside, the Nebraska winter continued its grip. On the land, but inside the farmhouse, two people were beginning to discover that sometimes the best way to heal from trauma is to help someone else heal from theirs. 2 weeks into their partnership, Marcus stood in his kitchen at dawn, watching Rebecca through the window as she examined the grain silos with a tablet computer in her hands. She'd transformed not just his record-keeping, but his entire approach to farm management. Where he'd once seen routine maintenance as an unavoidable expense, she'd shown him prevention strategies that could save thousands of dollars annually. The changes had started small. Rebecca discovered that Marcus was paying for premium fuel. Delivery when a cooperative 20 miles away offered the same product for 30% less. She'd renegotiated his insurance policies, finding coverage gaps that could have bankrupted him, while identifying redundant policies that were costing him money unnecessarily. But her most significant contribution was something Marcus hadn't expected. She'd begun treating the farm like a business rather than a lifestyle. "We need to talk about diversification," Rebecca said, entering the kitchen with her tablet and a steaming mug of coffee. She'd established a morning routine of inspecting different sections of the property, documenting maintenance needs, and identifying opportunities for improvement. "What kind of diversification?" Rebecca sat down at the kitchen table, which had become their informal conference room. "You have 800 acres, but you're only generating revenue from grain sales. That's like having a huge retail space and only using 10% of it." She opened a spreadsheet on her tablet, showing Marcus calculations she'd been working on for days. Based on soil composition reports and climate data, roughly 200 acres of your land would be perfect for specialty crops, soybeans designed for human consumption rather than animal feed, organic corn for the health food market, even heritage varieties that command premium prices. Marcus studied the numbers, impressed despite his natural skepticism about changing established practices. Those markets require different equipment, different knowledge. Some do, but the learning curve isn't as steep as you might think. And the profit margins are significantly higher than commodity grain. Rebecca scrolled to another section of her analysis. "But that's not the most interesting opportunity I found." She pulled up aerial photographs of his property taken from the county assessor's website. "Look at this section along Willow Creek. It's classified as wetland, so you can't farm it anyway. But it's perfect for agritourism." Agritourism? Farm stays, educational tours, seasonal events. City families pay good money to experience rural life for a weekend. You could convert the old barn into guest accommodations, create hiking trails along the creek, and offer hands-on farming experiences. Marcus felt his automatic resistance to change warring with genuine interest in Rebecca's ideas. "I wouldn't know the first thing about running a bed and breakfast. You wouldn't have to. I've been researching successful agritourism operations. In Nebraska and Iowa, most of them start small, maybe 1 or 2 guest rooms, weekend tours during planting and harvest seasons. The infrastructure investment is minimal, but the revenue potential is substantial." She showed him examples from nearby states, working farms that had transformed unused buildings into profitable hospitality businesses. "This operation in Iowa generates $75,000 annually from agritourism alone. They started with just a guest room and grew from there." The scope of Rebecca's vision impressed Marcus, but it also made him nervous. "These ideas require significant upfront investment. I'm not sure I can afford major changes right now." That's where the conservation programs come in. Rebecca pulled up another file showing government incentive programs Sarah had been researching. "I've been corresponding with the Department of Agriculture about several grants and cost-share programs. If we apply correctly, the government will pay for up to 75% of approved improvements." "Corresponding?" Rebecca looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind. I've been using your email address to contact various agencies. I figured it was more legitimate than trying to explain why someone else was inquiring about your farm." Marcus realized that Rebecca had been working far beyond their agreed-upon scope of bookkeeping and financial management. She'd essentially become a business development consultant, researching opportunities and developing strategies with the thoroughness of someone personally invested in the farm's success. What kind of improvements qualify for government funding? Environmental, conservation projects, sustainable farming practices, energy efficiency upgrades, even some types of agritourism infrastructure if it promotes agricultural education. Rebecca's enthusiasm was infectious as she outlined possibilities. We could install solar panels with 80% cost sharing, upgrade irrigation systems to reduce water usage, and create wildlife habitat areas that qualify for annual conservation. Payments. The transformation of his financial outlook was remarkable. 2 weeks ago, Marcus had been contemplating bankruptcy within 5 years. Now Rebecca was showing him scenarios where the farm could become more profitable than it had ever been. There's something else, Rebecca said, her tone becoming more serious. I've been researching land values in this area, and I found something concerning. She pulled up a map showing property ownership in the surrounding counties. Large sections were highlighted in different colors. See these highlighted areas? They represent land purchases made by agricultural investment companies over the past 5 years. Marcus studied the map, recognizing many of the farm names marked in red. The Patterson Place, the Mueller Farm, the old Henderson property. One knew they'd sold, but I assumed it was to other farming families. Some were, but most were bought by corporations that specialize in consolidating small farms into large-scale industrial operations. They're paying above market prices to acquire contiguous parcels of land. How much above market? 15 to 20% more than traditional buyers. Which means if they approach you with an offer, it's going to be very tempting financially. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. But if I sell, the land stops being the family farm. Exactly. It becomes part of a corporate agricultural operation. The farmhouse gets demolished or converted to employee housing. The land gets managed from a regional office, and another piece of rural community disappears. Rebecca scrolled to another section of her research. I also found something else interesting. 3 of the corporations making these purchases are owned by the same parent company, Meridian Agricultural Holdings. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Meridian, that's the company you worked for. A subsidiary, but yes. Same parent. Corporation. Rebecca's voice was tight with controlled emotion. It might be a coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidences anymore. You think they're somehow connected to you being here? I don't know. But Meridian has access to sophisticated data analysis tools. If they've been tracking my movement patterns, they might have identified this area as a place I could potentially hide. The implications of this revelation hung between them like a storm cloud. Marcus felt the return of the fear he'd been suppressing, that helping Rebecca might bring danger to his doorstep. What are you saying? That they're buying up land in the region as part of some plan to find you? I'm saying that a company involved in healthcare fraud probably has access to resources and information that most people don't. And they might be using those resources to systematically eliminate places where someone like me could disappear. Rebecca stood and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the snowy fields with new tension in her shoulders. Or it could be completely unrelated. Agricultural investment companies are buying farmland everywhere as commodity prices rise. This might have nothing to do with me, but you don't think so. My instincts tell me to be very careful about coincidences involving Meridian. Marcus joined her at the window, both of them looking out at land that had suddenly become more precious and more vulnerable. What do? We proceed with our plans to improve the farm's profitability. If someone does approach you with a purchase offer, you'll be in a position to refuse it without facing financial hardship. And if they don't accept no for an answer, Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then we deal with that situation when it arises. The conversation cast a shadow over the rest of the morning, but both of them threw themselves into work with renewed determination. If external forces were conspiring to disrupt their plans, they would make those plans as solid as possible before any confrontation occurred. Marcus found himself experiencing an emotion he hadn't felt since Sarah's death, protective instinct. Not just for his land and legacy, but for Rebecca and the new life they were building together. The thought of losing either to corporate manipulation or criminal intimidation filled him with a resolve he'd forgotten he possessed. That afternoon, as they worked together in the office organizing grant applications, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Whitfield, this is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Agricultural Holdings. I'm calling about a potential opportunity that might interest you." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike as he met Rebecca's eyes across the desk. Her face had gone pale, but she gestured for him to answer normally. "What kind of opportunity?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice level. "We're an agricultural investment company that specializes in helping farmers maximize the value of their land assets. We understand you own a substantial property in your area, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership." "What kind of partnership?" "We purchase farmland from families who want to transition out of active farming while providing generous compensation packages that exceed current market rates. Would you be available for a meeting sometime this week?" Marcus looked at Rebecca, who was frantically taking notes and shaking her head. "I'm not interested in selling my farm." "Of course, and we completely understand family attachments to agricultural property, but we find that many landowners are surprised by how much their property has appreciated in value. We'd simply like to present some options for your consideration. No obligation whatsoever." The woman's tone was professionally pleasant, but Marcus detected the same underlying pressure he'd heard from salespeople who wouldn't take no for an answer. "I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested in exploring any options right now. I understand completely. But Mr. Whitfield, given the challenges facing independent farmers in today's market, wouldn't it be prudent to at least understand what alternatives might be available? We're offering consultations that could provide valuable information about maximizing your land's potential." Marcus felt his temper rising. "Ms. Walsh, I've been farming this land for 30 years. I think I understand its potential." Certainly. But agricultural markets are changing rapidly, and sometimes an outside perspective can identify opportunities that might not be obvious. Would next Tuesday work for a brief meeting? We could come to you." "No, thank you. Perhaps Thursday would be better." "We really would like to, Ms. Walsh." I said no. "Please don't call again." Marcus hung up the phone, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Rebecca was staring at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. "They're not going to give up easily," she said. "Let them try. This is my land, and I'm not selling it to anyone, especially not to a company connected to the people who are trying to hurt you." Rebecca reached across the desk and squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For what?" "For choosing to fight instead of taking the easy way out." Marcus squeezed back, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "We're in this together now. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed his daughter's number. "Hi, Emma. Dad, I just got the strangest phone call. Someone from an investment company called me, asking questions about your farm. They said you'd expressed interest in selling, but that they needed to verify some family information first." Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you had any business partners, if anyone else had been involved in farm operations recently, if you'd mentioned anything about financial difficulties." "Dad, I didn't tell them anything. But why would they be calling me?" "I don't know." "Sweetheart, but I want you to promise me something. If anyone else asks questions about me or the farm, don't answer them. Refer them directly to me." "Dad, what's going on?" "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Marcus looked at Rebecca, who was listening intently to his side of the conversation. "It's complicated, Emma, but I need you to trust me and be very careful about who you talk to. This is scaring me. Maybe I should come out there." "No," Marcus said quickly. "I mean, I'd love to see you, but right now isn't a good time. I'll call you in a few days and explain everything." After hanging up, Marcus turned to Rebecca. "They're investigating my family connections, which means they suspect you're not alone." Rebecca's analytical mind was clearly working through implications. "They wouldn't need family information. If they thought you were just a farmer they wanted to buy land from, so they know you're here. They suspect someone is here. They might not know specifically that it's me." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at his property with new eyes. It no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a trap being slowly constructed around them. "What do we do now?" Rebecca joined him at the window, her expression determined despite the fear in her eyes. "We accelerate our timeline. If they're closing in, we need to be ready to fight back sooner than I planned." "Fight back how?" "It's time to contact that investigative journalist I mentioned. If Meridian is using corporate resources to track me down, that's probably illegal. And if they're pressuring farmers to sell through intimidation tactics, that's definitely something the public should know about." Marcus felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. "When do we start?" "Tonight. I've been researching journalists who specialize in corporate corruption stories. There's a reporter at the Washington Post who's written extensively about agricultural industry manipulation." As evening fell over the Nebraska landscape, Marcus and Rebecca prepared to shift from defense to offense in a battle that would determine not just their individual futures, but the fate of everything Marcus's family had built over 3 generations. Outside, the winter wind picked up, rattling the farmhouse windows as if nature itself sensed that a storm was coming. The email took Rebecca 3 hours to compose. Every word had to be perfect, compelling enough to grab an investigative journalist's attention, detailed enough to demonstrate credibility, but careful enough to avoid revealing information that could be traced back to her location. Marcus sat beside her in the office, reading over her shoulder as she crafted what might be their only chance to shift from defense to offense. "Catherine Chun," Rebecca typed, using a variation of her real surname with her middle name. "A former financial analyst with evidence of systematic healthcare fraud, totaling $40 million, seeks confidential contact with investigative journalists, specializing in corporate corruption." "Is it smart to use any part of your real name?" Marcus asked. "Chun is one of the most common surnames in America, and Catherine was my grandmother's name. It feels right to honor her memory in this fight." Rebecca continued typing. "The fraud involves manipulation of insurance reimbursements for elderly and chronically ill patients, with evidence suggesting corruption within federal law enforcement agencies." She attached a single document, a summary of the financial irregularities she'd discovered, with all identifying information removed except the pattern of theft itself. The numbers alone told a compelling story of systematic exploitation. Subject line? Marcus asked. Rebecca thought for a moment. "Healthcare fraud whistleblower seeks safe contact protocol." She addressed the email to David Martinez, an investigative reporter for the Washington Post, whose work on pharmaceutical industry corruption had won a Pulitzer Prize 2 years earlier. His articles demonstrated both the technical knowledge to understand complex financial crimes and the resources to investigate powerful corporate entities. "Send it?" Rebecca's finger hovered over the mouse. "Send it." The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it their hopes for finding an ally in what increasingly felt like an unwinnable battle against well-funded opponents. "How long before we might hear back?" Marcus asked. "If he's interested, probably within 24 hours. Investigative journalists get dozens of tips every day, but most don't come with actual evidence attached." They spent the rest of the evening working on grant applications for farm improvement projects. But both were distracted by the knowledge that they'd crossed a line from hiding to actively challenging their adversaries. At 3:17 a.m., Marcus woke to the sound of vehicles in his driveway. He moved quietly to the bedroom window and peered through the curtains. 2 black SUVs were parked near his front porch, their engines running. 4 men in dark clothing stood beside the vehicles, speaking in low voices. Marcus grabbed his bathrobe and moved down the hallway to Rebecca's room. He knocked softly on her door. "Rebecca, we have company." She opened the door immediately, fully dressed despite the early hour. "How many?" "4 that I can see. 2 vehicles." Rebecca moved to the guest room window and examined the scene below. "Professional security, not local law enforcement. See how they're positioned to cover all exits." "From the house?" "What do they want?" "Probably to make an offer I can't refuse." Rebecca's voice was steady, but Marcus could see tension in her shoulders. "The question is whether they know I'm here specifically, or if they're just applying pressure to see what happens." One of the men approached the front door and knocked, firm, authoritative knocks that echoed through the quiet house. "Mr. Whitfield," a voice called. "We'd like to speak with you about a business opportunity." "Could you please come to the door?" Marcus looked at Rebecca. "What do I do?" "Answer normally. Act like you're annoyed about being woken up, but don't seem afraid. And whatever you do, don't mention me or suggest that anyone else is in the house." Marcus descended the stairs, turning on lights as he went. He opened the front door, but kept the security chain engaged, creating a gap wide enough for conversation, but not entry. "It's 3 in the morning, he said, allowing irritation to color his voice. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not interested." The man at the door was tall and professionally dressed despite the early hour. "Mr. Whitfield, I apologize for the timing, but we have urgent business to discuss. May we come in?" "No, you may not." "State your business and leave. We represent parties interested in purchasing your property. We understand you declined a previous offer, but circumstances have changed." "My answer hasn't changed. I'm not selling." The man's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, we're prepared to offer you significantly more than your property's assessed value. Enough to ensure a very comfortable retirement anywhere you choose to live." "I choose to live here. That might not be possible much longer." The threat was delivered in the same pleasant tone, but its meaning was unmistakable. Marcus felt anger override his fear. "Are you threatening me?" "Simply informing you of changing market conditions. Independent farming operations face significant challenges in today's economy. Equipment failures, regulatory compliance costs, liability issues, unexpected problems can bankrupt a family farm very quickly. Get off my property." "Mr. Whitfield, we strongly encourage you to reconsider our offer, and if you have any business partners or associates involved in your operation, they should consider the wisdom of finding alternative arrangements." There, it was confirmation that they suspected someone else was involved. Marcus kept his expression neutral despite his racing heart. "I don't have any business partners. This is a family farm, and it's staying that way, of course. But should circumstances change, should you find yourself in need of immediate liquidity, due to unforeseen complications, our offer will remain available for a limited time." The man handed Marcus a business card through the door gap. "We'll be in touch soon to finalize details. Don't bother." Marcus closed the door and engaged all the locks, then moved to the living room window to watch the men return to their vehicles. They didn't leave immediately. Instead, they spent several minutes walking around the property, examining outbuildings and taking photographs with their phones. Rebecca appeared beside him, having watched the entire encounter from the upstairs window. "They're documenting the property layout. For what?" "Insurance purposes. If they can't pressure you into selling, they might try to force the issue through accidents that make the farm financially unviable." The SUVs finally departed, but their message was clear. This was not over. "We can't stay here," Rebecca said. "This is my home." "Marcus, they just threatened you on your own property at 3 in the morning." Next time, they might not be satisfied with the conversation. Marcus felt the weight of 48 years of attachment to this land warring with practical concerns for their safety. "Where would we go?" "I don't know yet. But we need options if this situation escalates." They spent the remainder of the night developing contingency plans. Rebecca had learned to think several moves ahead during 8 months of running, and she applied that strategic thinking to their current situation. "We need to separate ourselves from the farm's electronic systems," she said, making notes on a legal pad. "No more using your email for sensitive communications. No more researching anything related to our situation from your home internet connection. How do we communicate with the outside world? Library computers in different towns, prepaid phone cards, encrypted messaging apps that don't require real names. It's inconvenient, but it makes us harder to track." By dawn, they had outlined protocols for secure communication, identified potential safe locations if they needed to leave quickly, and developed a system for monitoring whether they were being watched. But the morning brought new challenges. Marcus's phone rang at 7 a.m. The caller ID showed his banker's number. "Marcus, this is Tom Bradley at First National. I need to speak with you about some irregularities in your account activity." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What kind of irregularities?" "We've received inquiries from federal agencies about your financial transactions. They're requesting detailed records going back 3 years." "What kind of federal agencies?" "The inquiry came through official channels, but I'm not authorized to discuss specifics over the phone." "Can you come in this morning?" Marcus looked at Rebecca, who was listening intently. "What's this about, Tom?" "I wish I could explain over the phone, but banking regulations require in-person discussion of federal inquiries. How soon can you get here?" "I'll be there within the hour." After hanging up, Marcus turned to Rebecca. "They're investigating my financial records, which means they're looking for evidence of unusual activity that might indicate you're harboring someone. Large cash withdrawals, changes in spending, patterns, anything that suggests your household expenses have increased." "Have they increased?" Rebecca considered the question. "You've been buying more groceries, using more utilities, spending money on office supplies and equipment for farm improvements. Nothing dramatic, but enough to show that someone else is living here." The trap was tightening around them with systematic precision. Financial pressure through the bank, corporate pressure through purchase offers, physical intimidation through late-night visits. Their adversaries were applying leverage at every available point. "I'm going to the bank," Marcus said. "You stay here and monitor the email account for responses from the journalist. I don't think you should go alone. And I don't think you should leave the house. If they're watching, they'll see you, and then they'll know for certain that you're here." Rebecca reluctantly agreed, but insisted that Marcus call her every hour to confirm he was safe. The drive to town felt different now. Marcus found himself checking his rearview mirror constantly, noting vehicles that seemed to be following the same route. The paranoia that had become Rebecca's constant companion was beginning to infect his own perspective. First, National Bank of Pierce County occupied a brick building that had anchored the town's main street for 80 years. Tom Bradley had been Marcus's banker for 2 decades, handling everything from equipment loans to the mortgage on his original land purchase. "Marcus, come in," Tom said, gesturing toward his private office, but his usual friendly demeanor seemed strained. "What's this about, Tom?" 3 days ago, I received a formal request from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network for detailed records of your account activity. They're specifically looking for patterns that might indicate money laundering or harboring fugitives. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "They think I'm laundering money? They think you might be providing financial support to someone who's avoiding law enforcement." The inquiry mentioned possible connections to healthcare fraud and federal securities violations. That's ridiculous. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. Marcus, I've known you for 20 years. I know you're not involved in anything illegal. But these federal agencies have broad investigative powers, and they can freeze assets while they conduct their review. Freeze my assets? Your checking account, savings, even access to agricultural credit lines. If they determine there's suspicious activity, they can lock everything down until their investigation is complete. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Without access to his accounts, he couldn't pay for spring planting, equipment maintenance, or basic operating expenses. They could destroy his farm without ever proving he'd done anything wrong. How long would an investigation take? Months, possibly years. Federal agencies aren't known for speed. Marcus realized this was another pressure tactic, economic warfare designed to force compliance with their demands. What do I need to do? Honestly? The best protection would be to demonstrate that your increased expenses have legitimate explanations. If you've hired help or made business investments, document everything. Show that any changes in your financial patterns are related to normal farm operations. Marcus left the bank with a sick feeling in his stomach. The web of pressure was tightening systematically, and he was beginning to understand how people broke under this kind of coordinated assault. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email, DM David Martinez. The journalist had responded. Marcus drove to the public library in the next town, using their computer system to access a secure email account Rebecca had created. Martinez's response was brief but encouraging. Reviewed your materials. Story has potential if sources can be verified. Need to establish secure communication protocol. Are you prepared for extended investigation that may take months and put you at personal risk? Rebecca had included a secure phone number in her original email. Marcus called it from a payphone outside the library. This is David Martinez. You responded to an email about healthcare fraud. Yes. Are you the source or a representative? Representative. The source had to go underground due to threats from people involved in the fraud. I need to speak directly with your source. Anonymous. Tips aren't sufficient for the kind of investigation this would require. She can't risk direct contact right now. There are people trying to kill her. Then we have a problem. I can't pursue a story of this magnitude without being able to verify sources and evidence directly. Marcus felt their one hope slipping away. What would it take for you to consider the story? Independent verification of at least some of the claims. Other sources who can confirm parts of the narrative. Documentation that can be authenticated through channels other than your source. How long would that take? Weeks, possibly months. This isn't the kind of story you can rush to publication. Marcus realized they didn't have weeks or months. The pressure campaign against them was accelerating daily. What if the source could provide additional evidence? Documents that would prove the scope of the fraud beyond any doubt? That would help, but I'd still need to verify authenticity. And I'd need assurance that the source is credible, not someone with a personal vendetta or mental health issues. Marcus understood the journalist's caution, but it felt like another dead end in a maze of impossible choices. I'll discuss it with my source and get back to you. The drive back to the farm felt like a journey toward an inevitable confrontation. Every mile brought Marcus closer to having to tell Rebecca that their best hope for salvation required exposing herself to even greater danger. As he turned into his driveway, Marcus noticed fresh tire tracks in the snow, tracks that didn't match his own vehicle or the SUVs from the previous night. Someone else had been on his property while he was gone. Marcus parked and ran toward the house, calling Rebecca's name as he burst through the front door. No answer. He searched every room, growing more frantic with each empty space. In the office, he found signs of a struggle: overturned chair, Scattered papers, Rebecca's tablet lying broken on the floor. On his desk, a note written in unfamiliar handwriting. Mr. Whitfield, your business partner, is safe for now. Whether she remains that way depends on your willingness to accept our previous offer. You have 24 hours to decide. Do not contact law enforcement. Marcus sank into his chair, staring at the note as the full weight of their situation crashed down on him. They had Rebecca, and now he faced an impossible choice: surrender everything he'd worked for, or risk the life of someone who'd become more important to him than he'd realized. But as Marcus sat in his destroyed office, surrounded by the evidence of Rebecca's methodical work to save his farm, he felt something unexpected rising in his chest. Not despair, but fury. They had made a critical mistake. They'd assumed he was just a simple farmer who would crumble under pressure. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Marcus stared at the ransom note for exactly 30 seconds before his mind shifted into a clarity he hadn't experienced since his military service 25 years earlier. The panicked farmer was gone, replaced by someone who understood that desperate situations required calculated risks. He pulled out his phone and called the number from the broken business card the security team had left the night before. Mr. Whitfield, the voice answered before the first ring finished. We were expecting your call. I want to talk. Excellent. Are you prepared to discuss our offer seriously? Face to face. 1 hour. The grain elevator on Highway 34. That's not necessary. We can handle the transaction remotely, face to face, or I call the FBI and tell them everything I know about Meridian Agricultural Holdings and their connections to healthcare fraud. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. You're not in a position to make demands, Mr. Whitfield. Neither are you. If anything happens to Rebecca Chun, I have instructions to release documents that will destroy your entire operation. She's not just hiding from you. She's been building a case against you. It was a complete bluff, but Marcus delivered it with the conviction of someone who had nothing left to lose. 1 hour, the voice said finally. Come alone. Marcus hung up and immediately called David Martinez from Rebecca's secure phone line. This is Martinez. It's the representative from the healthcare fraud case. They've kidnapped my source. Slow down. Who's kidnapped whom? The people involved in the fraud. Took her while I was away from the property. I'm meeting with them in an hour. Don't do that. Call local law enforcement immediately. They warned me not to contact police, and my source discovered that someone in federal law enforcement is feeding them information. I can't trust anyone. In an official capacity. Marcus could hear typing in the background as Martinez processed this development. Where are you meeting them? Public place. Grain elevator on Highway 34, just outside Pierce. That's not public enough. Too isolated. Too many places for things to go wrong. It's what I could negotiate. But I'm recording everything on my phone, and I'm sending you the audio files in real time. How? Marcus had learned more about technology in 3 weeks with Rebecca than in the previous 3 years. Voice recording. App that uploads directly to cloud storage. You'll have access to everything that happens. This is extremely dangerous. These people have already demonstrated they're willing to use violence, which is why I need you to be ready to publish if something happens to me. I'm emailing you everything we've compiled. Financial records, corporate connections, evidence of intimidation tactics. Marcus spent the next 30 minutes uploading files to a shared folder, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. If this confrontation went badly, at least the story would survive. The grain elevator sat at the intersection of 2 county highways, its towering concrete silos visible for miles across the flat landscape. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, parking where he could observe all approaches while remaining visible from the road. The black SUVs appeared precisely on time, approaching from opposite directions in a coordinated maneuver that spoke of military or law enforcement training. 4 men emerged, the same team from the previous night's visit. Marcus activated his recording app and walked toward them, stopping 20 feet away. Where is she? Safe for the moment, but her continued well-being depends on your cooperation. The leader was younger than Marcus had initially estimated, probably mid-30s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His companions maintained positions that covered all escape routes while appearing casual to any passing traffic. What do you want? Your signature on property transfer documents, effective immediately. In exchange, Ms. Chun will be released, unharmed, and you'll receive compensation significantly above market value. How much above market value? $2 million, cash transfer within 48 hours. Marcus felt his eyebrows rise despite his efforts to remain impassive. His property was worth perhaps $1.2 million at current prices. They were offering a premium that suggested Rebecca's evidence posed a serious threat to their operations. Where are the documents? One of the men retrieved a briefcase from the nearest SUV, extracting a folder thick with legal papers. Standard real estate transfer, with some additional clauses regarding confidentiality and non-disclosure. Marcus examined the documents, noting that the purchasing entity was listed as Prairie Holdings, LLC, with no mention of Meridian Agricultural Holdings. The confidentiality clauses were extensive, essentially requiring him to never discuss any aspect of the transaction or the circumstances surrounding it. These documents reference agricultural use restrictions. You're not buying this land for farming. The intended use is not your concern after the sale is completed. What happens to the buildings? Demolished within 6 months. The land will be converted to industrial agricultural production. Marcus felt a stab of grief at the thought of his grandfather's farmhouse and barns reduced to rubble, but he forced himself to focus on the larger picture. I need proof that Rebecca is alive and unharmed. The leader produced a cell phone and dialed a number. After a brief conversation, he handed the phone to Marcus. Marcus, Rebecca's voice was strained but clear. Don't sign anything. The documents I found, the line went dead. She sounds distressed, Marcus said, returning the phone. Ms. Chun is experiencing natural anxiety about her situation. Once you complete the transaction, she'll be released immediately. Where? A location to be determined after signing. Marcus realized they had no intention of honoring any agreement. Rebecca's knowledge made her too dangerous to release, regardless of what promises they made. I need time to review these documents properly. This is a major life decision. Time is a luxury you don't have, Mr. Whitfield. Sign now, or the offer is withdrawn. And if I refuse? The man's smile held no warmth. Then you'll be responsible for whatever happens to Ms. Chun, and you'll still lose your property, but without compensation. How would I lose the property? Agricultural properties are vulnerable to many kinds of accidents. Equipment failures, structural collapses, environmental contamination. Insurance companies are reluctant to pay claims when investigations reveal suspicious circumstances. The threat was delivered with the same professional courtesy as their previous conversations, but its meaning was crystal clear. They would destroy his farm through sabotage and ensure he received no financial compensation for the losses. Marcus looked around the grain elevator complex, noting security cameras mounted on the office building and a Nebraska State Patrol vehicle visible in the distance. The location was more public than it had initially appeared. If I sign these documents, how do I know you'll honor your end of the agreement? You have our word. The word of people who kidnapped an innocent woman and threatened to destroy my livelihood? Forgive me if I find that insufficient. For the first time, the leader's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Whitfield, you seem to be under the impression that you have negotiating leverage in this situation. You don't. Actually, I think I do. Marcus pulled out his phone and held it up so they could see the recording app was active. This entire Conversation has been automatically uploaded to cloud storage and shared with an investigative journalist at the Washington Post. If anything happens to me or Rebecca, the story goes public immediately." The men exchanged glances, and Marcus saw uncertainty flicker across their faces for the first time. "Additionally," Marcus continued, "Rebecca didn't just discover evidence of your healthcare fraud. She's been investigating your agricultural operations as well. She knows about the systematic targeting of family farms, the connections between Meridian subsidiaries, and the coordination with corrupt federal agents. This was another bluff, but it was based on Rebecca's actual research into their activities." "You're lying, am I? How else do you think we knew to expect your approach? Rebecca's been tracking Meridian's land acquisition patterns for weeks. She identified this area as a target before you ever made contact." Marcus could see his words hitting their mark. These men were accustomed to intimidating isolated farmers who had no idea what they were facing. The suggestion that their targets had been studying them in return was clearly unsettling. "Here's my counteroffer," Marcus said. "Release Rebecca immediately, and I'll consider keeping quiet about your operation. Continue to threaten either of us, and I'll make sure every newspaper and television station in the country knows how Meridian Agricultural Holdings operates. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with, Mr. Whitfield. This organization has resources and connections that extend far beyond what you can imagine. Then you should understand that killing us won't solve your problem. Rebecca's evidence is already in multiple hands. Making us disappear will only confirm everything we've claimed about your willingness to use violence." The standoff stretched for several minutes, with neither side willing to back down. Marcus could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air, but he forced himself to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. Finally, the leader's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He answered it, speaking in low tones while watching Marcus carefully. "There's been a development," he said after ending the call. "It seems Ms. Chun's evidence has already been partially verified by outside sources." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "Meaning what?" "Meaning that our principals are reevaluating the situation. They're prepared to make a different kind of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "Ms. Chun disappears permanently, but peacefully. No violence, no trace. You receive significant compensation for your cooperation, and you relocate to a location of your choosing with a new identity. And my farm becomes the property of Prairie Holdings LLC, as originally planned." Marcus realized they were offering witness protection administered by criminals, a way to eliminate both him and Rebecca as threats while maintaining plausible deniability about their fates. "What's to stop you from killing us both after we relocate?" "Nothing, except that dead witnesses sometimes create more problems than living ones who are properly motivated to remain silent." The honesty was almost refreshing in its brutality. They were offering a chance at survival in exchange for complete surrender of everything he'd worked for. "I need to speak with Rebecca before making any decisions." "That's not possible." "Then we have nothing to discuss." Marcus turned and began walking toward his truck, gambling that they wouldn't risk violence in such a visible location. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email. Urgent. DM at the public library in the next town." Marcus accessed his secure email account to find a message from David Martinez that changed everything. "Federal investigation into Meridian Systems launched based on your source's information. 3 arrests were made this morning, including an FBI agent who was feeding information to targets. Story breaking in tomorrow's edition. Need immediate contact with source for follow-up interview." Marcus stared at the screen, processing the implications. Rebecca's original evidence had somehow reached trustworthy federal agents, triggering arrests that would explain why his captors were suddenly willing to negotiate. His phone rang with the now familiar number. "Mr. Whitfield, we need to meet again. Circumstances have changed significantly. I'm listening." Ms. Chun is being released as we speak. She'll be at the intersection of County Road 15 and Highway 34 in 30 minutes. This gesture demonstrates our good faith in reaching a mutually beneficial resolution. Marcus felt cautious relief. What kind of resolution? We're prepared to withdraw our interest in your property and cease all contact with you, in exchange for assurance that no additional evidence will be released to media outlets. What about compensation for the harassment and intimidation? Consider Ms. Chun's safe return to be compensation. It wasn't justice, but it was survival. Marcus realized that sometimes the best victory was simply living to fight another day. And if we refuse to agree to silence, then the situation returns to its previous status with all the attendant risks. Marcus understood the subtext. The arrests had disrupted their operation, but hadn't eliminated it entirely. They still had resources and connections that made them dangerous, but they were now focused on damage control rather than expansion. I'll discuss it with Rebecca and give you an answer tomorrow. 24 hours, Mr. Whitfield. After that, our offer expires. Marcus drove to the intersection where Rebecca was supposed to be released, his heart pounding with the possibility that this nightmare might actually be ending. A car was parked on the shoulder of Highway 34, and as he approached, he saw Rebecca step out of the passenger side. She looked exhausted and shaken, but unharmed. Marcus pulled over and ran to embrace her, feeling a rush of emotion he hadn't expected. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding her tightly. "I'm fine, scared but fine." Rebecca pulled back to look at him. "Marcus, I heard part of your conversation. With them, the recordings, the journalist, that was brilliant. It was mostly bluffing. The best bluffs are based on truth. And we do have a journalist interested in the story now." As they drove back toward the farm, Rebecca explained what had happened during her captivity. She'd been held in a warehouse outside town, guarded by professionals who treated her well, but made it clear that her continued safety depended on Marcus's cooperation. "They received several phone calls while I was there," she said. "From their reactions, I think something significant happened with their operation in California." Marcus told her about David Martinez's email and the arrests that had been made. "That explains why they were suddenly willing to negotiate," Rebecca said. "Their protection within federal law enforcement has been compromised. The question now is whether we accept their offer to back off or whether we keep fighting." Rebecca was quiet for several miles, considering their options. "If we take their deal, they'll probably honor it in the short term. But there'll always be a threat hanging over us. And if we don't take it, then we finish what we started. We work with David Martinez to expose their entire operation, knowing that it puts us at risk but potentially saves other people from going through what we've experienced." As they pulled into the farmhouse driveway, Marcus realized that the scared, isolated man who'd found Rebecca in his grain silo 6 weeks ago no longer existed. In his place was someone who understood that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you chose to fight rather than the ones forced upon you. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Rebecca smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes completely. "I want to finish what I started. I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else, even if it means more danger for us. Especially because of that. We've proven we can survive their worst efforts. Now let's prove we can beat them completely." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Tomorrow they would give their answer to the men who'd tried to destroy their lives. But tonight, they would plan for a future where people like them could live without fear of corporate predators who believed money and power made them untouchable. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his renovated office, watching through the window as a television news crew finished packing their equipment. The interview had gone well, better than he'd expected for someone who'd never spoken to the media before. David Martinez's investigation had made their story national news. The Washington Post-series on Meridian's healthcare fraud and agricultural intimidation tactics had won Martinez a second Pulitzer Prize and triggered congressional hearings that were still ongoing. But more importantly to Marcus, it had ended the threats against Rebecca and transformed his struggling farm into something he'd never imagined possible. The reporter seemed impressed with the agritourism operation, Rebecca said, entering the office with 2 cups of coffee. She'd traded her fearful alertness for the confident bearing of someone who'd faced her worst fears and emerged victorious. She should be. Your business plan turned 200 acres of unused wetland into a $150,000 annual revenue stream. The farm had been transformed beyond recognition. The old barn now housed 6 guest rooms that stayed booked solid through spring and fall seasons. Families from Chicago and Denver paid premium prices to experience authentic farm life, complete with hands-on agricultural education and hiking trails along Willow Creek. But the most significant change wasn't financial, it was personal. The contractors finished the foundation work for the new house, Rebecca said, sitting down beside Marcus's desk. They think we'll be ready to start framing next week. Marcus nodded, still amazed by how naturally they'd begun planning a shared future. The modest house Rebecca was building on the south section of the property represented permanence in a way that the guest room arrangement never could. Any word from Emma about her visit next month? She's excited to finally meet the woman who saved the family farm. Marcus smiled, remembering his daughter's initial skepticism about his mysterious business partner transforming into enthusiastic support after meeting Rebecca over video calls. She also wants to discuss expanding the agritourism operation. Expand how? Corporate retreat packages. Her consulting firm would pay $10,000 for a weekend leadership retreat in a farm setting. Rebecca's eyes lit up with the analytical enthusiasm Marcus had learned to associate with her most profitable ideas. We'd need additional accommodations, probably event space in the main barn, catering capabilities. Already thinking about ROI projections? Always. Rebecca grinned, the expression transforming her face completely from the fearful woman he'd found in his grain silo. But this time, I'm thinking about building something permanent instead of just surviving until tomorrow. The secure phone they'd maintained during the worst of the crisis rang with David Martinez's number. They still spoke regularly as his investigation continued expanding into other Meridian subsidiaries and related companies. David, Marcus answered, putting the call on speaker. I have news about the trial. The lead prosecutor thinks they have enough evidence for RICO charges against the entire corporate structure. Rebecca leaned forward with interest. What does that mean for the healthcare fraud victims? Full restitution, probably punitive damages as well. Your documentation made it possible to identify every patient account that was manipulated. We're talking about $40 million in stolen funds being returned to people who desperately needed that money. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction at the thought of elderly patients and chronically ill families receiving justice. Rebecca's courage in preserving evidence had ultimately protected thousands of vulnerable people. What about the agricultural intimidation cases? 12 farm families have joined a class action lawsuit. The pattern you identified led investigators to similar operations in 6 other states. It's going to fundamentally change how agricultural investment companies are regulated. After ending the call, Marcus and Rebecca sat in comfortable silence, processing how completely their lives had changed. The terror and uncertainty of 6 months ago felt like memories from a different lifetime. Do you ever regret not taking their deal? Marcus asked. $2 million and new identities would have been a clean escape. Rebecca considered the question seriously. Sometimes I wonder what that life would have looked like. But I don't regret choosing to fight. Some things are more important than personal safety. Like what? Like making sure other people don't have to go through what we went through. Like preserving something meaningful instead of just surviving. Rebecca gestured toward the window, where golden evening light illuminated fields ready for harvest. Like building a future instead of just escaping from the past. Marcus understood completely. The farm that had felt like a burden and a reminder of loss had been transformed into something vital and forward-looking. But more than that, he'd been transformed from someone who was merely enduring life into someone who was actively creating it. "There's something I want to discuss with you," he said, opening his desk drawer to retrieve a folder he'd been working on privately. "More expansion plans?" "Actually, yes. But not for the farm." Marcus handed her the folder. "Partnership papers." Rebecca opened the folder, her eyebrows rising as she read the legal documents. "You want to make me an official partner in the farm operation? 50-50 ownership, equal decision-making authority, shared profits and responsibilities. You've done more to save this place than I ever did alone. Marcus, this is your family's land. 3 generations of your family built this farm. And you're the reason there will be a 4th generation. Emma's already talking about moving back from Chicago to help expand the operation. Without what you've accomplished here, there wouldn't be anything for her to come back to." Rebecca stared at the documents, and Marcus saw tears forming in her eyes. "This is the most generous thing anyone has ever offered me. It's the most practical thing I've ever done. You're not just my business partner, you're my friend, my collaborator, the person who helped me remember how to want things again." "What kind of things?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he pressed forward with the conversation they'd been avoiding for months. Things like waking up excited about the day ahead. Things like planning for a future that includes someone else's happiness. Things like wondering if friendship might grow into something deeper, given enough time and patience. Rebecca set down the partnership papers and moved to stand beside his chair. "Marcus Whitfield, are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking if you'd be interested in seeing what develops between 2 people who've survived the worst and discovered they work well together. After everything we've been through, a romantic dinner seems almost anticlimactic. We could start with something more adventurous. Maybe dinner and a movie in town. Really live dangerously." Rebecca laughed, a sound that had become Marcus's favorite part of their daily routine. "I accept your business partnership offer. And yes, I'd like to see what develops between us." As evening settled over the Nebraska landscape, Marcus and Rebecca walked through fields that had been in his family for 3 generations. The corn was nearly ready for harvest, the grain silos were full of last season's wheat, and the agritourism operation was booked solid through the end of the year. But more than the financial success, Marcus felt something he'd thought was lost forever. The sense that tomorrow would be better than today, that the future held possibilities worth working toward. "Do you think we'll ever feel completely safe?" Rebecca asked as they reached the grain silo where their story had begun. "Probably not completely, but I think that's okay. People who feel completely safe sometimes stop paying attention to what matters. And what matters?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her, the woman who'd transformed his life by hiding in his grain storage and refusing to give up when everything seemed hopeless. Taking care of each other, building something meaningful, making sure that when we're gone, the world is a little better because we were in it. Rebecca nodded, understanding passing between them without need for additional words. They'd learned that survival wasn't enough, that real victory meant creating something worth surviving for. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, where warm lights glowed in windows that no longer felt empty, Marcus realized that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you least expect them. He'd found Rebecca hiding in his grain silo, but what he'd really discovered was that healing from loss didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant being brave enough to build a future. Behind them, the grain silo stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, no longer just storage facilities but monuments to the truth that sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save someone else. First dot in the distance. A train whistle echoed across the prairie, carrying cargo and passengers toward destinations unknown. But Marcus and Rebecca were exactly where they belonged, on land that had weathered 3 generations of challenges and would continue to flourish for generations to come. Their story had begun with fear and desperation, but it was ending with hope and possibility. And sometimes, that's the most important transformation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.